Okay, so welcome to the Node.js uvwasi team meeting for June 21st, 2023. We'll follow our approach of going through the things that were tagged in the issue created in the repo, which is 1404. Before we get started, any announcements or news that people would like to share? Okay, nothing new then. So we'll move on to the first one. I don't think there's any updates on the WASI preview 1 FD reader ignore cookie argument issue, unless anybody else knows. So we might as well move on to number 210, which is feature allow project to be installable. So I think Blaine, you were working on that one.
Yep. So I've made progress on the issue to refactor the build. And so that PR is up. Colin has already approved it, I believe. I'm definitely no expert, and he said he's not an expert either. But I was able to link it into Whammer and build with globally installed versions of libuv and uvwasi. There's probably improvements that can be made to like locate the thing, but you know, I did that in the Whammer and it works. There's a feature of CMake that's very, very new, like 3.24 or something, that allows you to like call make available and it'll search for it globally and then fall back to fetching the content. A lot of the projects, like even us, even our CMake is the minimum version is a lot lower than that. So I'm not using that feature. And so you kind of have to work around that. And so I've not tested with a new version of CMake. The Whammer folks have already reviewed and found some stuff in, you know, the integration point, but I don't think that is related to our stuff at all. If it is, then we'll have to make a change, but I think we can merge this. And if there's changes, just do them as a separate PR. The other thing that came up on that PR is releases and updating version numbers. I suggested release please, which is what I use on all of my open source projects, but I didn't know like what the permission model was for GitHub Actions, and like if the node.org limits which actions can be used and things like that. But Colin did a quick search and he said that at least one repo uses release please. So I'll probably follow up in another PR to add that so that we can update the version number in the CMake file when we actually do a release.
Sounds good. If nothing else, we have instructions on doing a release. So maybe even just adding in, let me find those. I think I added them on the README. Yeah, so this right here, it would be good, I think, to add just like if there's a step that needs to take place manually for now.
Okay.
Just
yeah, I'll add the
step
manual. Yeah, I'll add the manual step in the PR that I have open.
Okay.
Since that will be required, and then you know when I find time, I'll add the automation.
Right. Yeah, that's if you've already updated that, or are you saying you will update it now in the manual in the PR?
I will need to make a change. I will need
Okay.
to make a change to the PR before we merge it.
Okay.
To document that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense, and we can automate it. There might be like maybe we can automate the whole more of the steps of the release. I don't know. Okay, that's good news. So that's that sounds. It looks like you're looking for Oscar to do a review too, and then you can probably land, right?
Yeah, after I update the documentation.
Yeah.
Should be good to go. Like I said, at least this version, this minimal version, And it was I think it was good of Colin to point out that Node doesn't actually use the CMake at all. So we don't really affect, we only affect other consumers. And I tested it in Whammer and it's working. So and that's one of the major consumers that I know about. So we should
Do
be
we
good,
need a
good to go.
release? Do we need a release for this, or do people, is it more like they clone and build them on their own?
So Whammer fetches our master.
Okay.
Which they should probably restrict it to a version, but that's a separate conversation from getting these global things to link in. So yeah, once this is landed, that means that our CMake stuff is actually also versioned. So, you know, ideally they could find our package and it would have a version number. And if that version number was incorrect with what they required, then it would error, right? Like a globally installed version. Like that's more work to do. Not something that really matters. I would say that this is a feature of the project, but it doesn't necessarily require a release. But it'll be useful to note in any sort of release notes that we produce.
Right, that might actually be something once it lands too, to mention in the news issue as well, like, hey, you can now build the uvwasi, sorry, uvwasi as a shared library as of this, you know, this PR that landed. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go back and find the minutes. So okay, I think we already know news this week. So implementing the 4 stubbed out sockets. So Oscar, I think you've been working on that.
Yeah, so I met with Michael and he helped me think through some of the challenges there. And so there's a plan to move forward. So I still need to which basically the update on like where the progress is on it. It's pretty much all of the necessary stuff besides actually implementing those 4 methods is pretty much done. The tricky bit with the way libuv handles like streams, it like really wants you to do a callback anytime a new connection comes in, which is really, it's smart from a libuv perspective, but from a WASI perspective, where my WASM wants to be the one to call sock accept and not the underlying library, it's a little annoying. But so Michael and I talked through some ways around that, and so I'm gonna give those a go, and then hopefully it works, and then we can get a PR up. And I think the other critical thing that we should mention here is we decided that we're not going to worry about supporting sockets with FD write and friends. We're only going to support sock send and sock receive for now, and then we'll follow on and add support for that, because we're pretty confident a lot of applications are just going to say it's a file descriptor. I can write to it. But we have a clear path forward for that as well. But V1 will just get the methods implemented so that it works, and then we can come back and add in the support for the other ones.
Yeah, and I think that unlocks a lot of testing and good stuff and integration in Node. So yeah. And I'll plan to, I have on my list to start to just write some tests so that once the stuff's there, we can have that part too. Okay, the next one was changes to WASI spec and snapshot preview 2. Guy, anything interesting you'd like to share this week on that one?
I'm just looking at the issue here to see what it currently is tracking. Sure. It's actually, this is the first time I've actually looked at this issue in detail, and yeah, I guess that fork that Colin was working on will be very out of date by now. So figuring out how to get that back up to date would be a very interesting exercise to do, actually. I've been implementing quite a bit of, well, I got the basic file system APIs running in this kind of shims library that we've got for JCO on the Bytecode Alliance org. And that's now actually supporting like itself, it's like self-hosted. So it's able to do its own file read operations when you're looking up with dependencies and files and stuff now, which is great considering it's still very much like just a thrown together prototype of the Preview 2 shims. But the file system operations have come together. Pat did a whole bunch of work on that. So we've got FS pretty much fleshed out. The next big one is sockets, which he's been working on. And that's kind of the next one that's going to be rolling out very soon. So streams, file system, clocks, we've got all ready to go on Preview 2. So these are the sort of things that we could even start prototyping on the Preview 2 branch potentially. So I think where we've landed on them is actually at a point where it could actually make sense to think about prototyping. If anyone was interested in doing that, I am still just have very minimal implementations of these things. Random is also mostly pretty stable. So WASI crypto is a whole nother topic. And I think that's probably going to be on hold for a little while, but there's some kind of longer term plans coming together on that as well. So, the core kind of WASI functions are mostly fleshed out at this point. So we could potentially start exploring that.
Yeah, it might be good to somewhere capture like, here are the ones you think are actually stable enough that it would make sense to experiment with.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, let me just go to the list I've got here in this Preview 2 shims project. So again, the link in case people don't have it. Clocks, logging, random, and CLI base are very straightforward and easy low-hanging fruit to implement. File system is quite involved and is heavily linked to the IO. So IO and file system are then kind of the next thing, but it's also relatively straightforward. And then poll is basically the async support we're going to have for now, and sockets is the kind of the next part of it that's under active development at the moment. But up to FS seems to be pretty solid at the moment. So yeah, I get the sense that it could actually be worth even thinking about. I wasn't sure what the best approach was for thinking about Node.js kind of implementations. At the moment, there's just a library that sits on top of the Node.js core functions and is still mostly stubs. If we wanted to pick up that Preview 2 branch, though, there's no reason we couldn't start looking at that.
Right. So starting to implement like some of them in uvwasi itself, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I could on the JS side, it's basically just a relatively straightforward import interfaces. But I guess my point is not that like we should do that, but like I don't think there's anything inhibiting us from doing that.
Right.
So
Okay.
there's some expectation that there's something on the Preview 2 side that should be, needs to be confirmed. I think where things are right now, it's at a point where there would be interesting implementation feedback that could come from prototyping.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's no pressure to do it either.
Okay. Put that in the notes.
Yeah, I don't currently. I know we discussed the upstreaming before, or prototyping in Node.js. Originally this Preview 2 shims repo was kind of just a kind of experiment For the most part, though, it's actually serving our needs and ending up being something that we are actually relying on in these self builds and stuff. So I expect just looking at this as an example of how to work with Preview 2 should be fine, as opposed to trying to do some node core PR that puts it into core. I think it's a library that supports it. And when we get to the point where we want to do performance optimization, the best path probably is to start from the bottom up with the Preview 2 project and work up from there, as opposed to trying to just shove it into node core. Yeah. I guess it really depends on what people want and when they want it, and it's difficult to predict.
Okay, but it sounds like, if we finished off the socket side of things and we're looking for the next step, there's some experimental implementations that would make sense or aren't blocked by anything, I think is what you're saying.
I don't see any reason that we couldn't start to be rolling that kind of work out. So, and anything that was previously seen to be blocking that PR, I think is now more a uvwasi concern than it is a Preview 2 concern, or Preview 2 not being in the right position, at least up until sockets at the moment, I think. Yeah, so Pat did some incredible work, just like fleshing out all the file system, and he's now blasting ahead with sockets and HTTP. So the next big thing we're going to be getting is obviously resources, which will change things a bunch. But for the most part, it's going to be fairly transparent. The initial implementation of resources will be to just treat them as effectively the same as we have for the descriptors right now. So it won't be that dissimilar, except you'll have this extra resource functionality on them. And it's on this kind of own and borrow model. So the change from the current API to resources shouldn't be as major, since they're effectively just almost like more like a sugaring on top of the current syntax or the current function definitions. If that makes sense. It's just replacing the drops and creates and methods as actual drops and creates and methods in the resource system.
Okay, and that I think takes us to the end of the agenda. Are there any other topics people would like to discuss or chat about? If not, we'll see you all next time in a couple weeks. Okay.
All right.